Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. We're joined today by absolutely legendary percussionist, Warren Smith. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Can you talk about the mallet instrument in general and how it works into the avant-garde settings that you played in with Cage and Parch, etc.?
Yes, they all like the mellow tone of the marimba, of course, you know. And the vibraphone, which I have covered up here, is not nearly as flexible, but it does have a motor that allows a vibration to come through. That's why they call it vibraphone. These you have to roll to get the sustained sound with them. But it's shaped just like the piano. It doesn't have the 88 keys of the piano. It doesn't have more than usually 3.5 octaves for the marimba, and only 3 octaves for the vibraphone. But there's also a small instrument called a glockenspiel, which is orchestra bells, and they're all constructed in the same style as the piano keyboard. So when you learn to master that somewhat, then you can pretty much perform on this instrument. People
want you to play a little. Could you play a little bit of, like, especially on the marimba, how you incorporated it? Play something that you might have played with Parch or in an avant-garde setting.
Oh, let's see. With Harry Parch, first of all, he built his own instruments.
We know, yes, of course, yes.
You know, so he didn't have the same tonal concept.
He had a 43 tone octave.
Yeah. So that was a different. But there was one thing that I remember was he had the whole ensemble playing a system of 5 beats against 7 beats. You know, so the 5 beats would occur 7 times, and the 7 beats would occur 5 times. So you'd get a rhythm that sounded like this. Of course, this isn't his instrument, so, you know, tonally it wouldn't sound the same, but those were the kinds of rhythms that we were performing.
How did you develop your own sound on the marimba?
Well, there's a classical way you can play the marimba, which is kind of like the xylophone, either by 2 mallets or by 4 mallets, but I was interested in composers that weren't writing for the instrument, so I had to adopt the instrument to my concepts of music and the particular composers that I was interested in performing.
Which were who? Let's for the audience.
Like Thelonious Monk.
Wow,
course,
that is fantastic.
Horace Silver wrote some beautiful pieces. You know, all kinds of balladeers. I listened, believe it or not, Nat King Cole. One of my favorite songs was it's in D flat. Oh man, there used to be I'll play the whole thing for you a little later, but
no, play it. Play. People want to hear you, man. People want to. Yeah, play it, man. We don't.
Girls, I know
Warren Smith, first stop here on the Jake Feinberg show here today. When you played with Miles, when you first met Miles, Charlie Neville, who's definitely going to be tuning into this, he talked about Miles was still known in the 50s as the guy who played with Bird. Mm-hmm. When you played with Miles first off, where was he at in his career? That was his first album as a leader?
No. He had evolved at that point. He started leading his own groups after Bird passed on. But
you played with him in 57 or 58.
Yeah. But this was more like in the middle 60s, where Miles was already well established. He had the personality of beautifully being dressed all the time, and he set styles, really fashion styles that a lot of people adhered to. He was in Esquire magazine, for instance.
Just for the record, I don't mean it. In Wikipedia, it says you played with him in 57, so you didn't actually play with him until 65?
Oh, yeah, because actually when I didn't play that much with him. I was fortunate enough to be on a few recordings, and a couple of times later on, even when Tony Williams started playing with him, I played vibraphone on some situations where Tony and I were both on the same album, which was really exciting.
You and Tony were playing on the same album with Miles. I'm just trying to get the idea of...
Well, Tony was playing drums, of course.
Sure.
And I was playing the vibraphone, because Gil Evans had written some extended compositions for Miles' small group. And I was fortunate enough to be around at the time and be Gil's percussionist, so we got...
What kind of... he wrote them for Miles' small groups. How small is small?
Like 6 or 7 pieces. He had I think he had a guitar. He was fiddling around, transferring into the so-called jazz funk idiom of his career. So there was a lot of electricity happening. Instead of just the upright bass and the regular quintet.
What kind of tunes were they? Were they odd metered, or is there a way you can?
As I remember, I think they were Wayne Shorter's tunes for the most part.
Wow.
On that particular, I can't even remember what the name of the album is. I probably got it around here somewhere.
Yeah, you got a ton of vinyl. Warren, I wanted to ask you right off. I was transcribing my interview with Tootie Heath, and he said today's in academia they teach changes and they teach sequencing. But he's like, I didn't even know what that was. Most of the cats didn't even know what that was. We were based everything on the pentatonic scale. Uh-huh. And they've gone beyond that now. Do you really think that vocabulary and melodic improvisation can grow in academia? That's not how you're a schooled cat, but you learned on the street.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think what has to happen is that people have to find a way to project the music out of their own experiences, and from their own neighborhoods and their own kind of family customs that molded them in certain ways. So they feel about certain things. Certain elements of music might reach them in a way that it wouldn't reach other people, So you seek out that projection and then try to attract people to your way of feeling it so that they can feel it emotionally the same way you do.
Can you talk about a life experience that maybe you can demonstrate in the marimba of expressing early on a piece that you composed for the ensemble that relates to your life experience as opposed to just book learning,
Yeah. There was a piece that I wrote for Boom.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom. That's Max Roach's the ensemble.
And it had 3 motives on it. Goes on those 3 motifs, and there's a melody that weaves in between them. Let's say, I'm not even sure if I can maybe...
I'm putting you on the spot.
that sounds like a regular melody, but it's really in 7/4 time. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, 6, and 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and 7. And then and then the next part goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and 7. And then the last part goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I brought it into a rehearsal, and Max liked it. And the reason, in fact, the piece was called MR7, which is the way that Max Roach plays the 7/4 time. Now, the first time I had ever heard anybody interpret that as a jazz figure was listening to Max Roach. There was a club called it's out in Brooklyn on Flatbush Avenue.
Was it the Cornet or something?
Cornet. And I went in there and...
The Blue Cornet.
Yeah. Blue Cornet. Oh, man, that was a great club.
Brian Jackson saw Miles probably with you, maybe, well, who knows? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I saw J.J. Johnson there with a quartet, and instead of having a piano, he had Bobby Hutcherson playing vibraphone.
Well, I'm go back to when you saw Roach playing in that time signature.
And he was playing this 7/4 time, and I had never heard 7/4 with a jazz melody on it. I mean, I'm used to, contemporary music and configurations because I studied through all that stuff with Cage and all kinds of
an absolute
crazy composers.
Crazy, but that was not jazz.
Well, no, it wasn't. But see, at the same time, they were trying to break away from the rigidity of strict European classical styles. And they were doing it in another way. And after a while, it all got kind of fused together with a mixture of all these different expressions. That was a great time to be playing music.
Oh, it was electric. I mean, I guess, could you explain, being that you worked with Cage and Parch, why were those guys, like, when Miles started to go off in his own directions, he was bored to death of bebop. What was their feeling about European class? Were they bored to death of it too?
Yeah. I met Cage when I first went to the University of Illinois, which was like in 1957. No, I'm sorry, 1952 to 53. And I was lucky enough that school had just hired Paul Price as the percussion professor. And that was the first experience that I had had with percussion ensemble per se. I'd heard African tribal drumming and stuff like that, but to hear music that was thoroughly composed. I've got a cabinet full of just percussion ensemble compositions.
So this room is full of enlightenment through rhythm, and this entire room stacked with it.
Yeah. I don't know how.
I can't put it. It won't translate on video, but so it was composed, hard driving, rhythmic music.
Yeah, and everything had a tempo and a conductor. One of the pieces that I remember was a piece by Bartok called Concerto for Two Pianos and Percussion, and there were a couple of other composers that really, really beautiful, just percussion ensemble music with, either drums or mallet instruments, and thoroughly composed, but just beautiful music that was really enjoyable to play. I think the academicians are still using it in the schools to teach the students now.
Going back to academia, though, what was your academic? Were you able to play in burlesque houses in Champaign-Urbana? You were playing at the Black Fat Pussycat. That's when you moved here.
Yeah.
But getting out of academia, Kenny Burrell runs UCLA School of Jazz now. They're having jam sessions in the four walls, in the halls of academia. But where were your jam sessions taking place?
Listen, I grew up in a house of music. My father played and taught and repaired saxophones. So there was a constant stream of saxophone players coming through the house and outside the street on the area. They just had... My father taught Gene Ammons and Johnny Griffin. Every week they'd come to our house, and my brother and I'd sit up there and look at them taking music lesson, before they went to high school, when they went into DuSable High School. That's my father gave them that. You know, so I
just to be clear, you came from Chicago. You came from the city. Okay, so you know Julian Priester too?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because Julian was playing with Muddy Waters and Sun Ra.
Muddy Waters. All these people. They had a blues joint across the street from my apartment. That we could open our window and hear the music coming out. You know, that's how ingrained that whole blues system was. Muddy Waters had his own nightclub. Howlin' Wolf. I had a cousin who was a chemical engineer, and at night, I knew him as a great guitar player, but he played bass guitar for Howlin' Wolf every night, you know.
What was his name?
His name was James Smith. We called him Funny, you know. I mean, that was the you know, the family name for him.
Sure.
But James Smith, you look at some Howlin' Wolf records, you'll see him playing the electric bass. So
when you were in school at Champaign-Urbana, would you on the weekends go up to Chicago to play, or would you?
They had plenty of stuff in Champaign and Urbana. They had their own nightclubs and blues joints and barbecue houses and all that kind of stuff. So you just had to get off campus and go into the neighborhood, which of course all the black kids did, you know, because they had a great black community out in that neighborhood, and the school itself, there were like maybe 300 black kids, most of them from Chicago, and it was like 20,000 kids in the school. So, you know, we kind of had our own system of doing things.
That leads into another question later, but I wanted to ask you if you could, you talked about being inspired for your first compositions, integrating the marimba into the music of Thelonious Monk. Is there a tune you can play for us?
Monk's tune?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. This is, let's see, Pananica.
Tell me the name of that tune again.
Pananica.
Pananica. Did Monk? When was the first time you got to play with Monk?
I never actually played. I guess I played in large ensembles of Monk's music, but I never actually played in that small group. You know, but I was in a situation where I was playing in a lot of clubs opposite them. Either
like in Mittens or somewhere else.
Yeah. No, this was in New York.
Yeah,
mostly. Yeah. Well, you know, unless we were out of country on a jazz festival or something like that.
What small group? So you were playing opposite Monk. Who were you playing with at that time?
Oh man, a lot of big groups like Johnny Richards and Gil Evans and I can't even think of some of the smaller groups that I played with because it's mostly large ensembles using a percussionist.
This is so fascinating though. Did Monk use the term jazz to describe his music?
No.
What was what was it?
Those were Monk's tunes. Those were
Monk music.
Yeah.
Mingus music. I mean, what was it? Roach. Max would go to blows with Gary Bartz would say to me. Max would go to blows with people if they called it jazz.
Max didn't like the tune. Didn't like the term at all.
Why not?
And I adopted his attitude about it because the terminology of jazz referred to the naval bases in New Orleans that the guys used the houses of prostitution, and they called them jazz houses. So in Max's interpretation, that relegated the level of our music in terms of respect to those type of institutions. And he didn't want it. He thought the music was more dignified than that.
Oh, I know, but I just want to be clear. The naval bases, the cats there were going to brothels, not located on the naval bases, but in downtown.
Well, they're in New Orleans.
Down in New Orleans.
Yeah. So they just, as soon as they got on shore, they just go to I've forgotten the name of the district now, but they were called. They were whorehouses, house of prostitution, but they all employed musicians to entertain the patrons, and so the people that played in those things got associated with the houses itself, rather than with the music that they were performing, which later gained more importance than just as an accompaniment for sexual activities.
So when you came to New York, was it always, I mean, were you guys saying, hey man, it's all music, like you were saying what Duke was saying at that time? Like, how did you refer to music before it was labeled via genre? Because I mean, my generation, that's all we know, it's gotten so stratified now. So what did you refer to it as? I mean, how did that work?
Well, Max developed the term of African American classical music. I shouldn't say he developed the term. I'm not sure that he was the first one who invented it, but formally speaking, in academia, that's the way I refer to it, as African American classical music. Because if you really think about the culture of the arts on the American continent, almost everything has been defined by the influence of Africans into America.
Right.
Because what the other immigrants brought here was based on the classical music of their cultures. And that was, strictly European classical music. Now, even today, or actually it happened 50 years ago when I was very young starting in the business, you would find situations where symphony orchestras were beginning to perform the music of contemporary composers. And a lot of their compositions were influenced by the syncopation that Africans had put into the jazz vernacular, see. So a lot of this music required people with that kind of concept and experience to even perform these pieces. So it opened up the doors for a lot of people like myself who understood those concepts, but everybody had to learn them now. So now they didn't have jazz in academic institutions, so-called, in those days. Although in the South, that's where they learned that music from, was in school, and it was indeed what you call jazz.
There's some heavy information there. Ken McIntyre, the program at Old Westbury, that was the first African American school of music. I mean, that's what it is sort of. Can you break down exactly what was significant, and was it just the idea that he was dedicated to the rhythms?
Well, no. First of all, we were a school in the system of the State University of New York, SUNY system, all right? Now, we were the first school that brought a program in the arts. They had African American studies, but we were the first ones who brought African American art, music, and dance into the curriculum.
Just for the peeps watching around the world, what specifically, what art did you bring?
What art?
You said African American art, music and dance.
Yeah. Well, it's the music that is created in the Yoruba tradition to accompany the tribal expressions of dance and theater that they have in those areas.
Yeah.
And you know, I was fortunate enough to go to Africa and visit and see some of these things in action, and they are institutionalized. They're taught like we teach our young kids, happy birthday to you, and all these traditional songs. They have the songs as well as the rhythms. And the difference there is that the foundation of their musical education is based upon traditional rhythms that are performed on the drum. So everybody has this basic rhythmic impulse inside of them. If they go off into the violin or into other melodical instruments, they still carry that culture with them, and that's the difference that it makes, you know, in the expressions of composers that write for those.
It's not notated either.
No.
You know, and that's what drove people crazy. The Europeans, they couldn't notate. They didn't understand how it was passed down from, you know, teacher to student.
Mm. Oh yeah, sure. Well, it's because they were used to doing it.
Have you composed anything recently? What was the last tune that you wrote?
Oh man, I've got piles of music up here on the desk that I'm always writing. You know, I haven't been working with my band in the last 3 or 4 years, a composer's workshop. After I lost the rehearsal space that we had downtown for so many years, so not rehearsing on a regular basis hasn't inspired me to write a whole lot of music, but I've been writing like backgrounds for poetry or theater and stuff like that, and I've got several projects that I'm working on to bring into presentation pretty soon. People
want me to stop talking. They want to see you play a little bit. Could you play like even demonstrate? I'm very much into the spoken word aspect of it. I mean, can you play something as background for that you might do for a poet, or?
Let's see. Trying to think of something.
Talking to Warren Smith here on the Jake Feinberg Show, and live from Harlem here.
There's a poster over there. It says it's an album that I did called "Cats Are Stealing My Shit," and it came about because we were all on tour, and we were traveling across Europe in a bus with Mulhall, Richard Abrams, big orchestra, and the bus had a bathroom, and we would use the bathroom, and you'd come out of the bathroom, and if you didn't slam the door shut, the door would start every time they go over a bump. The door would bloom, 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 you know. And Mulhall was sitting across from this door, so somebody came in and forgot to slam the door. He said, "Slam the toilet door! Slam the toilet door!" No, he said, "Shut." What did he say? "Lock the toilet door! Lock the toilet door!" And I said, "Now, why would somebody want to lock the toilet door?" And the next time I said it, "'Cause cats are stealing my shit," you know, and that vernacular meant something different, you know. It meant that people were stealing your ideas and this and that and the other. But I just elaborated on the song, and
I thought when I saw that this morning, though, my first thing was Warren's getting people are sampling his stuff. That's in modern day. That's what that meant.
Yeah.
But even at that time, it was
well. See now maybe that's what happened, because you do sample other people's. In fact, no composition would go on if none of us hadn't heard somebody else's music.
Everybody learns from somebody else.
Yeah,
that's right.
Or maybe it was Burrs or whatever. But that's, you know, with that particular piece. So the poem went, and I'll do it with the music. Lock the toilet door, grab the toilet door, cats are stealing my shit. Bar the toilet door, star the toilet door, cats are stealing my shit. Jam the toilet door, slam the toilet door, cats are stealing my shit. So lock the toilet door, lock the toilet door, cats are stealing my shit. 1, 2, 'cause cats are stealing my shit, trying to copy my shit, creaming up on my shit, stealing into my shit. Now they can't copy my shit, they can't get to my shit, can't get into my shit, 'cause it's just too slick, so I'm gonna lock the toilet door, that's stealing my shit. That's the short version. But it was, I'll tell you an interesting story. While I was at the State University of New York in Old Westbury, we got a very conservative new president to come in, a woman.
After McIntyre had already established?
After McIntyre had left, and I was there to confront this person, and she came to a concert, and I was getting ready to perform this play, and I saw her there, and there were a bunch of children there. So I had to explain to the children, first of all, there's a device that African Americans use in their language called circumlocution, which means that we will take terms that mean something else and substitute them for other things. And then I had to
repeat the term again. What is it called?
Circumlocution.
I dig.
That is, you know how you say, well, a perfect example is, man, that's Muhammad Ali's box. Oh, that's Muhammad Ali's shit to where he moves it. Or that's Sonny Rollins shit to where he plays the trumpet, or the saxophone. Or that's Max Roach's shit when he plays the drum solo. All these kinds of things. We always referred to it like that. And I mean, for generations before I was old enough to use the term, we were familiar with it. And as children, we used it in this expressive way. Not as
a derogatory
not
thing.
as what was the word I'm trying to use?
Profanity.
Profanity. Not as profanity, but as a descriptive terminology.
Oh, wow.
And this is profound in American language. The difference between the way English people speak and the way that Americans speak this language is because of the slang that we use in this country that doesn't apply to what they use in England. So, the styles are very obviously different and easily heard.
When you talk to the children, how did that work out with the conservative new head of?
Well, I explained to them that there is a bodily function that we all do every day, and I desensitized it that way. I said, now we're all familiar with this. I said, now we call it very different things. There are popular words like defecation and urination and whatnot, but when you're at home, you hear your parents refer to this, so all of the children are familiar with this term, And when I went into that explanation of it, then it kind of softened everything, so that when I broke the joke about cats are stealing my shit, then everybody could laugh without, being shocked.
Very savvy.
Yeah. Well, it was particularly for more of the adults than for the students.
Of course.
Yeah.
Just to put a button on this, McIntyre, what was his legacy in terms of that school, the SUNY system? Specifically, what was not there before his program?
Before that program, now they've got a great program in SUNY Purchase, and that's why they retrenched us, because we were competitive to SUNY Purchase, and they wanted that to be the flagship school for the arts. But, damn, I forgot the point I was trying to make.
No, his legacy to Old
What
Westbury.
happened was that McIntyre was teaching at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, Middletown, Connecticut. And there was a man who was an official at that school that became the new president of Old Westbury. And he brought McIntyre in to set up the music program. So McIntyre and I were good friends. I had played in his bands.
What was the name of the record you made with him?
Huh?
The Lamb, or the what was
the director's name was John. Oh shoot!
No, I was talking about the
Garvey.
record you made with McIntyre in the early '60s.
Oh!
The Ram or something.
Who?
It was like a Ram or something.
No. It was the year of the Iron Sheep.
Thank you.
That's
the year of the Iron Sheep.
Yeah, because he's Iron Sheep and I'm the Wood Dog in our zodiac terminology.
Wow, the Wood Dog.
Yeah. That's when you were born in the Taurus sign. That's what I want to be. Yeah, but that was his birth sign, the Iron Sheep.
But you knew him. I don't mean to keep losing your train of thought here. He went out there. He came from Connecticut, came to SUNY Westbury.
I grew up to Connecticut. In fact, Ken was teaching out in Ohio, Central State, was it Central State University in Ohio? Or one of the small SU, traditionally black universities and colleges, HBCUs. And then he went over to Wesleyan University from there. But one of the teachers there became the president of the new college in Old Westbury. And he hired McIntyre to set up the music program. He said, what kind of program do you want to set up? And McIntyre said, I want to set up a program in African American music. This was not very
mainstream.
Almost non-existent. In the
it was non-existent. It was non-existent.
Because in that year, I have a paper called The Grackle that showed all of the black professors who were suddenly getting jobs teaching African American music in colleges. Max Roach was one, Jackie Byard, Bill Cole was teaching up at Dartmouth College. I mean, there were a whole, maybe about, a dozen of us. A bunch of people started a program at Massachusetts, UMass
Amherst, yeah.
And in fact, Max was up there teaching. I went up there and subbed for him a couple of times, and they put on programs of African American music in the colleges. It was fantastic, and it wasn't that there hadn't been African American teachers, but the music had not garnered the respect of academia to be presented on that level until we started doing it. You know, I mean, and it was indeed, you know, there were black colleges that were teaching this music. You know, that's how, like, Fletcher Henderson's orchestra, a lot of those orchestras that started in the South were developed on those campuses. But we were the first in the SUNY system to start the program. And it wasn't just, we decided, or I should say McIntyre decided, that it would be music, dance, and theater. So we hired a black dance professor, we hired black theater people who started doing music, theater pieces that were black oriented. We did one piece by a Swiss author named Peter Weiss called The Song of the Lusitanian Bogey. And this piece was all about the exploitation of black labor in gold mines and different other areas in the south of Africa at that time. All that stuff has since been broken up and no longer in existence. But it just,
what do you mean broken up?
Huh?
What do you mean broken up?
I mean the gold mines are no longer supervised by white supremacist bosses who are not paying them well. You know, I'm not saying gold mining isn't happening.
Sure.
But people are getting paid to do their work now
right.
instead of being slaves.
Sure. That's important to note.
Yeah.
Did you get to play with Rahsaan Roland Kirk at all?
Yes. But not on a regular basis. His drummer Sonny Brown was a good friend of mine, and he let me sit in with Rahsaan. That's how I got to know him in Chicago. I was hanging out, and they were playing, and then when we came to New York, I was able to do some of his larger orchestra recordings, you know, as a percussionist and as a second drummer sometimes, you know.
Yeah, no, this is Warren. The record we have behind you is one that is the Harry Parch record I put up on the piano there.
Oh yes.
Can you talk about, and you produced that record?
Yeah. What happened was this whole record. It's called The Bewitched. My last year at the University of Illinois, before I came to New York, Harry Parch did a residency for the entire year. So he set up a studio and he brought in all these exotic instruments that he had actually made himself, tuned, you know, and they gave him a beautiful studio lab to work in. And he set up rehearsals for the entire year, Monday through Saturday. We had Sundays off. Every evening from 6 till 10 we were rehearsing this music, and it was something because it was a different style of notation. We used rhythmic impulses, but the rhythmic measurements were different sometimes, or quite often, and the instruments were instruments that we had not played on before, that we had never seen before. One of the most spectacular instruments that he had was called the marimba eroica. And the marimba eroica, you see this instrument. One bar, it had 4 bars on it.
Right.
And one bar was about this big. This wide, wow. Just one piece of wood, about so thick. And there were just these 4 bars, which were the base foundation of this particular composition. The largest bar vibrated at 16 vibrations per second, which meant that we couldn't hear it, And the guy had a mallet that was about this size. I don't have anything as big as that here to describe it, but about this size on a big rod. So it took a fairly good-sized person to play it. But you'd hit this one mallet and you could see it vibrate, and you couldn't hear anything, but you could feel the vibrations in your stomach. I mean, it was amazing. You could see it moving and you could feel it with that same rhythm, but you actually couldn't hear the sound.
So what would be the function in a live context with that type of marimba?
Believe it or not, you felt that vibration in the audience.
So you felt it in your stomach?
Yeah.
Wow.
You
So it was a vibration, just the rhythm?
Nobody doubted that the element of that rhythm was there, but you just didn't hear the actual pitch. It was just too low.
Wow. So those rehearsals would go on, and then you would perform for people at the school?
Well, we didn't perform until the end of the year. We worked, and then we did a concert in the main auditorium at the University of Illinois, and then we went down to St. Louis and did a performance with the whole ensemble. We had to transfer all those instruments down there. And when he got finished with this residency, he went up to Yellow Springs, Ohio or somewhere, and I had the privilege of helping him load all this stuff in the truck and drive him up there. And then I had to bring the truck back to the school before I went home for the summer. But even that was an experience, watching him.
Well, Emil, when he was living in Sausalito, when Parch was living there, Emil paid for his entire move to L.A. just so those instruments would stay intact. I mean, because they could break easily.
Oh yeah, well, we had people to load them, but I actually drove the truck with him.
I did. Everything is absolutely connected, man.
Yeah, it was. Well, that was part of the education too, because I heard some more of his stories and things on the way up there. Oh, that was part of it.
Did you play? Were there beat poets? African American beat poets that you played with before? I mean, you played with Melvin Van Peebles. He's not a poet.
Yeah, well, that's
that was later. But I mean, when were there cats? Because I mean, you hear about the main cats, the main beat poets, but were there cats, black poets that you played with when you got here to New York?
No, that hadn't evolved yet. They were still in the stage of vocal groups and quartets, and some large ensemble like Tape 6, were like street corner groups that were singing in doorways and whatnot, and then the Philadelphia sound and all that just evolved. I played a lot of backgrounds for those groups when they were coming up with Philadelphia International and all those things. I had one period where almost every week we'd do a couple of record dates a day, and then one on Saturday without the union supervision, bootleg records we call them. And those would be people coming up to do demos from out of town or out of state or something like that. And a lot of those things became big hits, and then finally that took over the industry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, what does it say that we've moved to a point? I mean, you were in the pit, Broadway pit,
yeah.
I think in like 61 or thereabouts. I mean,
yeah,
you got these were gigs, like you had serious gigs, and I wonder what your thoughts are about how music is, the significance of music has changed in our culture? How has it changed?
The styles have changed.
In what way?
I mean, the emphasis has gone less from what we call pure expression of jazz or classical music into, all the inventions of sound amplification, for instance. You know, when I first started playing, we didn't have bass amplifiers.
Right.
You know, we didn't use microphones. Well, they might use a microphone to.
Well, the music was just coming out of the PA system. I mean, your ears had to grow, man.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, but most of it was actual, just acoustic sound. You know, originally, and we watch these things grow. They've got these recording booths, and I can tell you exactly how the recording booth system started. We used to all be in one big room.
No baffles.
With all the instruments, and a young man was playing with James Brown, and his name was Bernard Purdy. And they started calling him up and doing record dates. Now, Bernard was a great drummer, still is. But they weren't accustomed to people playing in the studios with that kind of strength and that kind of volume. So what happened was, after a while, they started putting up a baffle in front of his bass drum so that wouldn't come through. And then they found that the top sound was coming, so they put an umbrella over the drummer's situation to house the drumming, you know. And then eventually they moved us, the whole drum set, into a soundproof booth.
Wow, this is unbelievable.
But see, you can see that
the evolution there.
Yeah, and less than, depending upon the musician's skill to moderate these things, it became the venue of the engineers to control all of this.
Wow, this is fascinating.
And I think the engineers became almost too involved in the expression of the music, where their opinions became more important to the production of records than the actual artists themselves.
Was there a record you can point to prior to the engineers getting their hands into it, that where the musicians had full say and really had their art and their voice heard within the music that you were on?
Well, that's what I was saying. See, when everybody was in one room by themselves, I'll give you an example. We were doing one of Spike Lee's first movies. It wasn't She's Gotta Have It. It was like School Days or something like that, which was a campus scenario. And there were some times when we had, like, the whole school band had to be replicated. So you had snare drummers and tuba players and whatnot. And there was a situation where somebody had to play a conch shell, you know. And the guy who had it, I forgot who it was, I know him very well, Steve Turre.
Steve Turre, wow.
He picks up his shell, and he had to move away from the microphone. He was sitting playing what did Steve play? The cello or the French horn, or can't even remember what his instrument was, but he got up out of the chair, and his leg, as he moved back away from the microphone to blow this conch shell, got caught in Howard Johnson's tuba. And all of a sudden you see Howard Johnson and his tuba going over backwards like this, and right away Spike Lee jumped up and said, stop, you know. And of course everybody laughed. They caught Howard before he got hurt or anything, but we had to start the whole take all over again just for that. But the point I was trying to make was that everybody was in this situation, and there was a mic overhead, like they would amplify the New York Philharmonic in Carnegie Hall. And so we had to control our volume, and everybody had to hear. There weren't a peripheral of earphones on, so that, you know.
You're talking about dynamics. You really learned dynamics.
Well, we grew up learning dynamics, you see. Now people can plug themselves in like they do in the subway with the earphones, and you don't know the level of anything that you're doing because they're manipulating controls inside with how much of your sound actually gets recorded. So.
Just would you play, before we wrap here? Could you play some kind of something for some kind of blues or whatever's in your heart right now, whatever you want to express to the world? Why people have been loving this all the way around, man.
see.
I just, before I let you go, the picture in the upper right corner for the audience is Duke Ellington on drums.
Yes.
Can you talk about Duke's influence and how his philosophy of music not only probably holds up better today and should hold up better today than it even did when he made those statements? He said, this is the point, Tootie said to me, Ellington said, the music should have 1 foot in the future and 1 foot in the blues. And that's what makes it interesting. So can you riff on Duke and his significance today?
Absolutely. I think I might have been like 5 years old when I first heard Duke Ellington live. And they had this theater in Chicago called the Regal Theater on the middle of the South
Senator
Side.
Eugene Wright used to play there all the time.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the curtain would be closed, and I was always thrilled because, you know, I had been around bands because my father was in bands, and I could hear behind the curtain that they would be warming up, and somebody would give a note, and the
right.
notes would be in tune and everything, and you could hear all this stirring, and they had this new thing in those days where there was a microphone that would come up from the floor and raise up, before they even open the curtains, and that was, everybody'd start applauding then, you know, and then the curtains would open and the band would start playing. And this thing always fascinated me, but Duke Ellington, the compositions, you know, now my father very early in my life got a recording. It was like, it was a 78 LP record that had, or album that had 3 records in it. It was called Black, Brown, and Beige. And I learned all of that music by heart.
Wow.
You know, I knew every one of those songs. We would put them on, and we could, you know, they're my brother and Caliprush and Maurice McIntyre lived on the 3rd floor, and Melvin Van Peebles lived on the 2nd floor with his brother. And we would get together and listen to these records and have it all memorized so that we could pantomime whoever solo it was and take turns, you know, what you'll be Dizzy Gillespie and I'll be Charlie Parker, and you know, and I mean, we all knew this as adults. We get together sometimes and remember how much of that music we knew literally, you know, just by listening to it over and over. And well, we didn't have television, you know, and none of these other devices had been invented, so our concentration was probably more focused than young people now.
Well, your ears were not locked at all either.
No, but see, it left a lot of room for your imagination to fill in those gaps.
Big, yeah.
You know, and so I am not sure, but I'm glad that I came up when I did, because there's a lot of stuff that I probably wouldn't have engaged in if I'd have had these kinds of inventions around me at that time.
Can we finish with one of those black, brown, and beige tunes on the marimba?
Oh. Let's see. That's about all I can.
I'll tell you, you have been cranking. Warren Smith, what an honor, man. Thank you for continuing the lineage of rhythm and melodic music, and bless you for letting me into your house today on this trip 1 here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you, my brother.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Music is my life, and I'm glad to share it.
Take care. We'll be back later.